todos, qué bueno reencontrarnos a través de esta plataforma. Yo soy Dani Mora, quien les acompaña en este proyecto que ha implicado gran esfuerzo para reunir a grandes personalidades de la terapia Gestalt con perspectiva de campo. En esta oportunidad vamos a estar hablando alrededor de la psicopatología de la situación, el enfoque fenomenológico, estético y de campo de la terapia Gestalt a la práctica clínica. Todo esto acompañados de una gran invitada que no requiere gran presentación, sin embargo leeré un poco de su perfil profesional. Ella es Margherita Spagnuolo Lobb, ella es psicóloga, psicoterapeuta, directora del Instituto Gestalt, Centro de Comunicación Humana y de la Escuela de Especialización en Psicoterapia Gestalt, con oficinas en Siracusa, Palermo y Milán. Además de dirigir la Escuela de Especialización en Psicoterapia, es directora científica de los programas internacionales a los que asisten psicoterapeutas de todo el mundo. Es profesora internacional de psicoterapia Gestalt, invitada a diversos institutos de formación y universidades italianas y extranjeras. Ha enseñado y enseña en 28 países. Formó parte como consejera del primer consejo de la Orden de Psicólogos de la región de Sicilia. Fue presidenta de la Asociación Europea de Terapia Gestalt desde el año 1996 al 2002. Expresidenta también y fundadora de la Sociedad Italiana de Psicoterapia Gestalt. Fue presidenta de la Federación Italiana de Asociaciones en Psicoterapia y de las escuelas e institutos de Gestalt. Es miembro titular del Instituto de Terapia Gestalt de Nueva York, también de la Sociedad de Teoría Gestalt y sus aplicaciones y de la Sociedad de Investigación en Psicoterapia. Ha escrito, por supuesto, numerosos libros y artículos, algunos de ellos traducidos a 8 idiomas. Dirige la revista italiana Cuadernos de Gestalt desde el año 1985. Dirigió la revista internacional de estudios en terapia Gestalt y puentes dialógicos desde el año 92 al 98 y colabora con numerosas revistas. Esto es un poco del perfil profesional, aunque tendríamos mucho más para nombrar, de la doctora Margherita. Su último libro lleva por título Psicopatología de la situación y en terapia Gestalt, así que veamos qué tiene la doctora Margherita para compartir con nosotros en esta entrevista. Esto también acompañados de Johnny Calle, quien hace de intérprete y traductor y sirve como puente comunicacional en este proceso de entrevista. Así que espero que disfruten y se puedan nutrir muchísimo de esta entrevista. De antemano quiero decir que estoy total y profundamente agradecido, doctora Margherita. Y bueno, nada, quiero extender un gran abrazo desde acá. Tengo un montón de preguntas para usted. Intentaré que no sean demasiadas.
Yes, okay.
Okay, so the first question we have is just a very general question, and it is how can psychopathology be understood from a phenomenological, aesthetic, and field perspective?
Okay. Well, phenomenology is about experience. It's not about unconscious drives. It's not about conflict. It's about experience. And the experience is a whole of feelings and thoughts and movements towards something. Like Brentano said, one of the fathers of phenomenology, Brentano said that every action is aimed to something. So phenomenology just changed the perspective about looking at human beings from looking at the inside and the reasons and causes to looking to the going towards, to where the person is going towards. So how can we look at psychopathology from this point of view? This is the point. How can we adjust the concept of psychopathology going from an inner conflict to some desire, some wish towards the future? And how can we understand psychopathology from an experiential point of view? Now, Gestalt therapy uses this concept of figure and ground. The ground is the thousands of possibilities, and the figure comes out from the ground like a determination. It's a complex movement from ground to the figure, But what I want to say is that we can wonder, we can inquire what kind of ground experience is in psychopathology. This is what I have explored. What kind of ground in psychopathology? So if we consider a neurotic person, what kind of ground experience can we find in a neurotic person? And what kind of experience in a borderline person, or in a psychotic person, in a traumatized person? So I think that the ground shapes somehow the figure and also the way the person makes contact with the environment. Figure is the outcome of the contact making with the environment. So there is a ground experience that is made of how do I perceive the world? How do I perceive my own suffering and the others' suffering? Do I perceive clearly the boundary between me and the other? So this is the condition of the neurotic suffering, when there is a clear boundary between me and you. And I suffer from something I would like to do and I'm not able to do, from some intentionalities that are not accomplished. But if there is a borderline background, then the experience is weaker somehow. It's quite different. It's not the whole. So the borderline experience, ground experience is, I don't know who I am exactly. I might be the devil, I might be an angel. So I'm just wondering, who am I? And when I make contact with you, with the other, the way I shape the contact boundary is ambivalent, and I'm very cautious. Are you the devil or are you the angel? So I'm in doubt about who I am and who you are. And in psychosis, there is no boundary at all. In psychosis, there is a great anxiety in the background experience. So I cannot distinguish how different you are from me. If I am afraid that my mother maybe will die, or this anxiety is in my background, and I see you in function of my mother dying or not dying. So maybe I can say, are you a doctor? Can you cure my mother? So it's the delusion in psychosis is explained, or I explained it in this way, that the anxiety that is in the ground experience shapes the figure with the other. Maybe I spoke too much and you didn't translate, Johnny. So I don't know, where is Danny now?
Sabemos que la psicopatología convencional se centra en lo que no funciona, y lo revolucionario del diagnóstico estético es buscar aquello que sí funciona bien en la situación de sufrimiento, dar lugar a aquello que aún es vital, que es la llamada para ser reconocido por otro ser humano. ¿Cómo se busca o encuentra esta belleza en medio del sufrimiento?
Well, we need to understand what we mean by beauty. For me, the beauty is not only for me, I mean, I learned this from Irving Polster. You know, he died last week, Irving Polster, and he was my dad. He was my father somehow. I trained with him and Miriam, first of all. Then I trained with others. But they taught me the aesthetic glance that is very much connected with the concept of vitality. So when a child is crying because he cannot go to play with his friends, and he cries and he punches the mother because he wants to go to play. Where is the beauty in this? It's this punching is his will. He's trying to show his mother what he wants. So he's keeping the punches are keeping him alive. I want to do this. I want to do this. No. So these kind of things are the vitality that we look for in psychopathology. So when we are in front of a client who suffers of panic attacks, for instance, or a psychosomatic disturbance, we, as you know, in Gestalt therapy, we breathe, we use our body to understand the experience of the client, and we look at the body of the client, and we try to see, to look for where the vitality is. So any kind of suffering that the person is telling us includes some vitality, some wish to be better, some wish to be in contact spontaneously with the world. So these are all words that are connected, the one with the other. Connection, vitality, beauty, intentionality, wish. I mean, these are all connected terms. So this is what I mean by finding the beauty in the here now of the client who is communicating to us not only his suffering, but always also his wish to go out from suffering. So in every suffering, there is always some wish to go out from suffering. And you can find that in the body, in the bodily movement of the client, in a certain glance, in a detail of his bodily experience, and also of his words. And so we are trained to see that, to see the vitality, and we support that. If a client says, I suffer of panic attacks since 1 month, we might wonder what happens before the panic attack to this client, what kind of inner conflicts he suffers from. But we are in a relational Gestalt therapy, and we are not interested in that, but in seeing how he explains his panic attacks to us. So in the here now, he might feel humiliated, because if he tells us, I suffer panic attacks, and he feels very humiliated about that. Or he might appear like privileged. I suffer a panic attack, like a fashion. This is the main thing that we look for to stay with these people, to try to make this person feel better, because if he feels humiliated, the meaning of panic attacks is to make him humiliated. And so we wonder, what is the other side of the word for him? What do I feel when the client feels humiliated? Do I feel sorry? Do I feel angry? Do I feel disappointed? Because my feeling completes the sense of the field of that client. We are part of the situation as therapists. We are part of the situation. So our feelings are connected with the field of the client. What we feel is connected with the client's feeling, with the feelings of the client.
Y eso me hace preguntar algo particular, y es, ¿se puede considerar el propio sentimiento del terapeuta como parte del campo del cliente?
Yes, this is exactly what I consider in my concept of aesthetic relational knowing. I'm studying this construct. I did research about this construct, and I think that what we feel is part of the client's field. We might say, but it's something of ours. It's also something of ours. But how come that just in that moment we feel in a certain way? So if the client speaks to us about his panic attacks and he feels humiliated about this, And I feel disappointed somehow. I feel a sense of disappointment. I know this disappointment is my disappointment because I have experienced this many other times. But how come this disappointment comes to my awareness just now in front of this client? So there is something that connects his expression with my experience, his experience with my experience. And the field is this for me, is the participating in the same situation. The situation is the therapeutic situation. So the client comes to the therapist with the hope to feel better, with a sense of being exposed, of course, and he expresses his suffering. And with the therapist, we participate in this situation with all our feelings, with our empathy. First of all, embodied empathy. This embodied empathy makes us feel able to participate in the feeling of the client, in their field. So we share a situation. And of course, we are never sure of something. We don't have to be deterministic, but we try. I mean, this is the other concept that I have developed is the dance steps between therapist and client, So I try. If I feel disappointed with this client who feels humiliated, I wonder how this disappointment has to do with the life of the client. And so I try to understand this. And I might say to the client, if I can, if there is the good ground for this, I might say, well, I'm realizing that when you tell me that you suffer panic attacks, I felt some disappointment in myself. I don't know how to explain that. Does that say anything about this? About that? Does that have anything to do with your life? And he might say, well, my father was always disappointed by me, anytime. So we know that our feeling has something to do with the client's feeling.
Ahí tengo una pregunta muy puntual y es, cuando hablamos de belleza, que es lo que más me llama la atención de sus postulados, ¿a qué belleza nos referimos?
Yes, if we take the situation of humiliation, feeling humiliated and feeling disappointed, the client and the therapist can understand something of the field, of the original field where this pain was co-created. But the therapist also looks for the vitality of the client. So he feels humiliated, but this is not the only feeling. Humiliated for what? Because he would like to be the best for his parents, and he is not able to do that because he failed, but he wanted to be the best for his parents. So this is the beauty, that he wanted to be the best for his parents. This is his energy towards. And he feels humiliated because he cannot be the best now. So, I don't know if I answered to you. It's a possibility. It's just an example.
I'm trying to remember because you said a lot of technical examples. I'm just trying to.
I can repeat it.
That would be awesome. So I can, and if you do it in short lines, I can just translate to Danny.
If we consider the situation, the client feeling humiliated and the therapist feeling disappointed, this is interesting. And we try to understand, as therapists, we try to understand if our feeling disappointed has to do with the life of the client. We are not sure about this. So, and we inquire about that.
Y sobre lo que nos preguntamos.
And we discover that the client's father was always disappointed. So we know that our feeling has something to do with the client's life. It's like a repetition in the here and now of something that the client knows well. How is that possible? We believe that the experience is made at the contact boundary between two people. So when this client felt humiliated, the question is, what was the other doing for him to feel humiliated? So in somehow the client has learned that the other feels disappointed. And also in neurosciences, they have, Siegel has developed this concept that our brain learns not only what we do, but also what the other does. In our brain, we have maps of what to expect from the other, and this happens in the session as well. So what the therapist feels can be connected with what the client expects from the other, and this allows to us a depth in the therapeutic relationship that is very, very deep, a depth that is very deep. But at the same time, we know that we figure out this situation of disappointment and humiliation. And we wonder where the vitality of the client is. So we are very attentive to signs of vitality in our clients. For instance, we can see a glance of love to us, or we can see a glance of hate to us. So they are both signals of where the vitality of the client is and where his beauty is. The beauty, as I said, is the way the client tries to keep contact with the environment, with all his vitality.
Esto quiere decir que hay una belleza, entonces, en lo que el cliente, el paciente hace. Esto quiere decir al mismo tiempo que todo sufrimiento incluye una intencionalidad de contacto. ¿Esa sería la belleza?
Yes. The beauty is how the client keeps him or herself alive in contact. And this implies an ecstatic attitude, the ecstatic attitude, I learned the ecstatic attitude from Irving and Miriam Polster. They said that the therapist is like, has the wonder of a child, the wonder attitude of a child.
Esto implica una actitud estética.
Estática.
I'm sorry, estática. I understood aesthetic. It's static.
Estática.
Okay, una actitud estática, no estética.
So it's different from aesthetic, but it's in the same line. The ecstatic attitude is like going out of myself and look at the beauty, look at the wonder about the beauty in the universe. Ecstasy.
Okay, that's really
not the drug. Ecstasy is not the drug, but
the feeling.
The feeling of ecstasy. Yes.
That's marvelous, I have to say.
Sí, tengo una pregunta, y es que ha mencionado en algún video algo que llamó mucho mi atención, y es que se reacciona a la belleza con el propio cuerpo. Eso de que hay una reacción vital ante la belleza, ¿no? Es decir, cómo reacciona el cuerpo del terapeuta ante la belleza. Ahí hace referencia a la danza de la reciprocidad.
Well, not only that, I consider in the session, the therapeutic session, I consider intentionalities for contact. And they are different in different moments of the session. So if you think, when you go to your own therapy, before arriving in the session, you think something, you prepare yourself, you maybe think of what you want to work on, and then when you are in front of the therapist, it's just another story, no? You are curious about how the therapist feels, and then you decide whether to tell him the dream that you had about betraying your wife, or to tell him that you dreamt of an old love story in your life. So you adjust what you say to the therapist according to the way you perceive the therapist. So you can decide whether to tell your therapist that you dreamt to betray your wife, or you tell your therapist an old love story. And then you choose the same topic, but adjusting it to your therapist. And then you start to dance with your therapist. I mean, you start to the therapist asks something and you answer. No, there is some adjustment, mutual adjustment, and then all of a sudden something happens and you understand something new in your life. It can be after an experiment that the therapist proposes to you, or it can be after some inner reflection that you do with the therapist. Anyway, something new pops up. And after this, you can relax your tension and you can have fun with your therapist. And at the end of the session, you experiment a sort of intimacy with your therapist. So these are all intentionalities for contact that we experience during the session, both as therapists and as clients. And we dance with this, looking for mutual movements supported by these intentionalities. So I'm studying how we can describe the contact, making the sequence of contact in a mutual way, like in a dance, not just what one person does, but what they do together.
¿Cómo exploramos entonces esa intencionalidad de contacto? ¿Hay algunos criterios para esto? Que me imagino que son criterios estéticos.
We have a model to describe the contact making between therapist and client. And in the founding book, Peirce, Effelin, and Goodman describe the process of contact. After that book, in the Cleveland circle, they described this contact making like a circle. So that starts from awareness, then contact making, etc. This drawing the contact making as a circle was criticized by the New York Institute. I belong to this institute, the New York Institute. They studied a lot the contact process, and they said that it's not a circle, but it's like a line, an open line. So they said it's a sequence, it's not a circle. And we even had some confrontation, some debate with the Cleveland people. So the Cleveland people and the New York people discussing this concept of the contact, the process of contact. Is it a circle or is it a sequence? And we all agreed that it's a sequence. Even the Cleveland people agreed that it's a sequence. So we have a description of the contact making that comes from what we call the Bible, the founding text. But this description of the contact making during a session seems mostly focused on an individualistic perspective. So what one does in contact making. And Gordon Wheeler has criticized a lot this individualistic perspective. And also from the 90s, we have developed the relational approach of Gestalt therapy. So I'm very much inside this movement of the relational approach. And for me, the relational approach comes from Isadore Fromm, one of the members of the New York Institute, and he was my therapist. So I learned from him very well, this idea of contact making and a relational Gestalt therapy. And then there is also Lynn Jacobs and Gary Yontef, who have also developed a relational approach, more developing the concept of integration and inclusion and Buber and etc. But we agree, we are very much in combination. So what I tried to develop in these years is a way of describing the process of contact as a dance, as something that two people do, going out from the individualistic perspective into the relational perspective. So to answer your question, it was a long answer, Danny, but I wanted to explain this. We have a model that is the process of contact. Something happens at the beginning, in the middle, at the end of a session. This is our model that we can describe. And so this helps us to orient ourselves in the session. And then we try to train therapists to see the beauty, to see the experience of the client, to grasp the energy that is in the intentionality for contact of the client. So to see the energy that is in the intentionality of contact of the client and to respond with our own energy. So we see the client's energy and we also can see our own energy and we can respond to the client with our energy. That's why I called it dance, because there is a movement of the client and we respond with our own movement. And then we are able to adjust, continuously adjust. If our movement is not so good for the client, we change our movement to adjust to the client. And the dance is how we stay with these intentionalities until the end of the session.
¿Puede dar un ejemplo clínico de este movimiento, de esta danza?
I have written something about this in response to Daniel Stern's theory. Daniel Stern is also one of my sources. We worked together for 9 years. So he spoke very much about dance, and there I published a session, the session, and it's an example. And I also published an example in the British Gestalt Journal. It's the transcription of a session. But anyway, a rough example can be that the client sits the beginning of the session. I know that we are building together the sense of the ground, of the safe ground. This is the way I see the start, the beginning of the session. How are we building together the sure ground? And so I sit comfortably myself, I breathe, I feel open in my body, and I look at the client. I feel open with my senses and I look at the client. I don't push, but I just listen and I breathe. So the client can perceive this breathing with subcortical structures in their brain, not with their intellectual ability, but with subcortical. They perceive that, And how does the client respond to that? Is the client relaxing as well? So breathing and maybe putting the bag aside or crossing their legs, just relaxing and ready to say what they want to say? Or is the client tense and continues to feel tense? So there are two different examples. And if the client relaxes, I know that the client is flexible enough to, to say what he wants to say, to adjust to the situation. He perceives the sure ground. If the client doesn't relax, is still tense, I can imagine that he has a lot of anxiety in his background experience, and he cannot relax. So I wonder, what can we do for the client to relax? And to relax becomes the goal of the session, the main content of the session, and not just the first step. And then going on, if the client relaxes, then I listen. I'm ready to listen to his story and his recount, and I see how the client looks at me. Does the client controls me? Just controls how I move? If I feel rigid about his story, or I feel relaxed. So the client controls me, for instance. So the way we go on dancing is maybe controlling the therapist, and I try to communicate that I'm relaxed. How much? So the question for me is, how much is this client able to relax in front of me? How much is available to relax and not to control? So it might be that I see that the client is not able to relax and he continues to control. And so I wonder, how come? Is this a sign of anxiety, of course?
Mm-hmm.
Is this connected with some momentary anxiety, like obsessive compulsive attitude? Or is this something that is always there, like in a psychotic state?
Mm-hmm.
Or is this something about a moment of the person, like he's very worried about someone who is sick, or himself who is sick? So I explore all these possibilities, having the dance steps in my mind.
Claro. Bien. Y su último libro lleva por título La psicopatología de la situación, ¿cierto? ¿A qué se refiere con que la psicopatología es algo propio de la situación?
Yes, it's exactly what we have said until now. The psychopathology is not something of one individual, but it's something of the situation. So maybe the psychotic client has a lot of anxiety because he has some biological intolerance to novelties and anxiety, or because he lives in a psychotic family with a lot of aggression and inability to see the other. So the psychotic experience, all this anxiety in his background, is like an answer, a reaction to a psychotic environment where nobody sees the client and they are all worried. There is a lot of chaos, a confusion, and nobody sees the client. So the client is worried because he perceived the worries, and nobody can take care of him. So he has to withhold all this anxiety, keep it in his background experience, and try to solve it somehow, not seeing the other. It's impossible to create a boundary with the other in this way. The psychopathology is always comes out, is the outcome of a situation. And there can be some criticism about the word psychopathology, no? Because psychopathology is in itself is referred to the classical model. So psychopathology is referred to one person usually. We want to underline, to stress that psychopathology is not of one person, is from a situation. And we in psychopathology is like suffering, you know. It's a normal, let's say, reaction to a difficult field, a normal reaction to an understandable reaction to a suffering field. This is psychopathology of the situation.
Pensarlo así hace que la intervención o el acompañamiento sea totalmente distinto, ¿cierto? ¿Cómo se acompaña esta experiencia de sufrimiento sabiendo que es parte de la situación?
I think the best word is the word recognition. To recognize what the client is doing in this situation, what he or she wants to achieve. So to be recognized by an other is in line with our theory, with our method, which is humanistic. So the mutual recognition between two human beings is the basis of humanistic principles. And the recognition is what makes the client feel a human being recognized with a sort of dignity, no? Even if I suffer panic attacks, my life is full of dignity. And so the goal is not to cancel, to erase panic attacks or the symptom, but to make the person feel with dignity, feel okay among other human beings. And this secondary, makes the symptom disappear. Usually, not always, but usually.
Bajo esta lógica, ¿cuándo se da el alta terapéutica?
I think it's something that is contracted. Who decides the end of the therapy? No, the client feels okay. Now, if he or she feels he doesn't need this support, he can be alone. He can go on by himself, and the therapist agrees with this. So it's always something that comes from the two of them. But usually it's the client that feels the wish to go alone. I have an example that is paradoxical, because I had a client who is psychotic, was psychotic, and remains somehow psychotic now. And we stayed in therapy for something like 3 years, and we did a lot of work together. And then she joined the Buddhist group, and she decided to start the therapy because Buddhists were her therapy now. And I didn't agree very much, because she was not so able to earn a life alone and things like that. I was afraid that the Buddhist people, even if I like Buddhism, I esteem Buddhism, but I was afraid that this was a sect that could exploit her. And I had to decide, and I trusted her. I decided to trust her because it was so important for her to define herself, like able to finish the therapy. So she did it, and she's okay. She's okay. She writes to me from time to time. And I like her very much. She's not a normal neurotic. She's a bit strange, but it's okay. She can make her own living,
Okay. Y para cerrar, lo más discutido, ¿son interrupciones de contacto o modalidades de contacto? ¿Se detiene el contacto o no?
Yes, very interesting. There was this discussion was inside the New York Institute something like 20 or 25 years ago, And if I remember correctly, what came out is that contact cannot be interrupted because contact is always there.
Mm.
So I know that not all my colleagues think in the same way. I think that contact, for the meaning that this term has in our theory, is not interrupted, especially during the session.
Mm-hmm.
Also, what is important for me is to consider the length of time inside the session. So we are not considering the ontological meaning of the existence of a client, but what he does in one session, in 1 hour. And in that hour, contact is there between therapist and client. So contact is not interrupted, but we can observe how he makes contact. So modalities of contact, yes.
Okay. Entiendo. Doctora Margherita, muchísimas gracias por haber aceptado y por regalarnos esto a todos los que estamos ya de este lado. De verdad que admiro mucho su trabajo y espero en algún momento poder encontrarme con usted y darle un gran abrazo.
Gracias. Thank you very much, and a lot of good wishes for you, for your future, for what you are building in Colombia.
Okay. Listo. Un gran abrazo. Que esté muy bien. Hasta luego.
Hasta luego.